Okay, awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. How's everything? All right. How are you all doing, my urban nights? Oh my goodness, listen. Sorry I am late. Oh my gosh, I had technical difficulties. I had no idea what was happening. I could not get on via live YouTube. So I had to go through other means. I had to go through Zoom. So we are here now, my urban nights. How are you all doing? Before we get into the nitty gritty, I have to ask you to do a couple of things. I have to ask you to like, share, and subscribe to this page and also to this channel. Also, we're going to get into the nitty gritty tonight. We have a couple of things, but before we get started, I do have a question that someone asked me, and here it is. Is this Urban Tools for Change? Is this only for Negroes? That's the question that I was asked. So if you have been dealing with anxiety, if you have been dealing with depression, substance use disorder, guess what? You have joined the Negro Club. Welcome to my new Negro. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Yay. Welcome aboard. So today we're going to talk about government issued ID. And I have to say that I had no idea, seriously, because I didn't really think about it. I really didn't think the importance of government issued ID and the effect and the impact that it has on people's lives. I guess because I take it for granted because I have an ID, I have a passport, I have a state ID, I have other IDs, I have, my social security card, I have my original birth certificate. So, I just kind of took those things for granted. And I really did not think about what could happen as a result of not having ID. I thought about it in the sense of what could happen in terms of financially, but I did not think about it when it comes to like your mental wellness and how mentally unwell one can be. So let's take a journey, if you will, and think about if you're not able to prove who you are. How would that look if you went to the bank? You can't even go into the bank and open a bank account without government issued identification. You can't get services without government issued identification. You can't even get employment above the table. Now that's the key word, above the table without government issued ID. You can't even get housing without government issued ID. Basically, without government issued ID, you're not able to prove yourself. And for our community, it is a recipe for you to be impoverished, for you to live a life of poverty. And we have to really understand the importance of securing this government issued ID. Now, I told you all that I am employed with Blessed Ministries Incorporated. We are a workforce development agency. So we work with people who have been incarcerated and they are returning to the community. So we work with a whole lot of parolees that come out of prison without government issued ID. And to be perfectly honest, the only thing that we can do for them is to make certain that they have 6 points. And I'll go over those 6 points to make certain that they have those 6 points that they take to the New Jersey DMV office so that they can secure their government issued identification. Because guess what? You cannot get a job above table without that government issued ID. It's so important. So what I ran across, I have to put my readers on, a couple of articles. One is from the PBS news hour, and it's called Leaving Prison Without Government ID. It can block access to housing, jobs, and help. And that's what will happen. So different states have different laws. Now, this article is based in Oregon. Now, this is what they do, their Department of Corrections. The Oregon Department of Corrections helps inmates apply for replacement Social Security cards and birth certificates and pays states fees for birth certificates. But in other states, incarcerated individuals have to navigate that process somewhat by themselves after release. That's kind of disheartening because some of our clients don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the skill set, they don't have the technology now to sign up for DMV. So here's one guy, his name is Ewing, Randy Ewing, 44-year-old. So Randy Ewing was released from Deer Ridge Correctional Institution in Oregon after serving nearly 3 years for two, not one, two felony domestic violence charges. All right, so because of COVID, he was required to spend the first 2 weeks after release in quarantine in another facility, moving him to Eugene, Oregon, where he found temporary housing. But guess what? He was able to track down his Indiana birth certificate while he was still in custody. He made an appointment to DMV, but guess what? The earliest appointment for him to secure his ID was in 6 weeks. Can you imagine not having ID for 6 weeks? I cannot imagine. And this is what he said. He said, I was like, man, this is wild. That caused me a bit of anxiety. It's a big deal. It's a huge deal. You cannot seek housing, proper housing services. You can't purchase a house without ID. You can't rent a place without ID. I mean, the amount of anxiety that has to be for one who does not have ID is incredible. And I'm going to go back to the Atlas of Emotions. I always talk about the 8 levels of intensity associated with fear. He said it himself. It caused him some anxiety. Now, this is the thing. Look at his charges. 2 domestic violence charges. Okay. Now, this doesn't say that he was not rehabilitated in prison. I'm not going there because I don't know the man personally. But if he was charged and convicted of 2 domestic violence charges, that means that he has a difficult time processing his behavior. Okay. Because remember, I said in the event that you become mentally unwell, there are 3 things that happen. It's your feelings, your beliefs, and your behavior. And your behavior will determine basically if you're mentally unwell or not at that moment. So when he was engaged in that domestic violence act, he was deemed mentally unwell at that time. So I said also, when you have a certain amount of anxiety and you are confronted with a behavior, you can do one of 5 things. Now, this is not something that anyone else I've researched. This is Dr. Lisa Lacan coming from me. You can do number 1, nothing at all. Number 2, you can respond positively to the situation, to the event. Number 3, you can violate the law. Number 4, you can violate someone else. And number 5, you can violate yourself. So oftentimes when you're at a point where you're overly anxious, that's what can happen. And you can be overly anxious because you don't have the proper documents to prove who you are. I guarantee you, if you try to go into a bank walk up to the bank teller, ask the bank teller, I would like to open up a bank account. And tell me, what is the first thing that she asked? Maybe not the first, maybe the first, second, or third, but the top three things that she may ask of you is, do you have ID? I need to see who you are. So how can you create credit without having an ID legally? How can you obtain legal wealth without having government ID? How can you maintain your sanity without having government issued ID? I don't know. So anyway, here's another article. It talks about the ramifications of not having government issued ID. So one of the things that it talks about is, which I thought was very interesting, I have to put my readers on, you guys, lack of economic independence. And this is what I was just talking about. People without identification cannot go to a bank and request the creation of a bank account. This limitation directly affects their development in modern life. They cannot ask for credit. You can't get a credit card without ID. But guess what? In some states, they want you to vote without ID, which I have a problem with, because what people are hearing, when you let people know you don't need to have an ID to vote, the same people are not hearing what you're really saying. They're hearing, because they're my clients. They're hearing you don't need an ID at all. You don't. So rather than saying, okay, you know what? Don't worry about getting an ID because guess what? You can vote. That is the wrong message, in my opinion. In my opinion, that is a very destructive message to our urban community. Our urban community, we need to develop resources and sources so that those without identification, guess what? They can go and vote with ID and they can open a bank account. Because right now, as it looks like to me, you can vote, but you can't get a job above the table. You can vote, but you can't get a bank account. You can vote, but you can't get housing. You can vote, but you can't get medical services and therapeutic services. You can vote, but you can't get health insurance. Something is wrong with that picture. Listen, that's just my opinion. But we need to really establish something like, say, for instance, the NAACP. They could help support this move and this push so that people coming home from prison, so that people who may be homeless can secure ID. Now, you may ask, well, what if they're homeless? What ID, what address can they use? Well, guess what? These agencies can help them set up like a PO box without it reading like a PO box, to make it look like it's a housing address. That's what can happen. So don't come up here with no excuse talking about, well, what if they homeless? They ain't got no address. You know what? There's enough money to go around to help us in the urban community. It definitely is. So I don't want to hear no excuses about none of that stuff, okay? Because if you are not able to prove yourself, you cannot legally, I said legally, you cannot legally acquire wealth. You will remain poor, broke, busted, and disgusted. And because you don't have your government issued identification. So prior to me coming on, I had all this information about where you can go and the 6 points, but unfortunately it didn't load. So I'm going to share that with you right now. Okay. So in the state of New Jersey, we have these New Jersey standard license and non-driver ID requirements. I don't know if you can see this, but this is what we have in the state of New Jersey. So it has points. You need 6 points, right? So these are worth 4 points. These are worth 3 points, 2 points, and 1 point. So the 4 points, this is the big kahuna. That's like your passport, your birth certificate, original birth certificate, things of that nature. Secondary is your New Jersey digital driver's license. But now this one in the group number 4, you have to submit at least one document from this group, okay? And then from the secondary group, you must submit at least one document from this group. And then this last one, I think it's no more than 2 documents. Yeah, no more than 1 point document allowed. So no more than 2. So only one of within here. Okay. So say for instance, if you have a passport, that's 4 points. So you only need 2 points. So if you have a passport and you have a US government employee driver's license, you're set, because that's 4 plus 2 equals 6. So you are set. And then you need proof of New Jersey residency. All right. So you have to submit one document from the following: a driver's license. So how are you going to get a driver's license if you don't have one? And then you need your social security card. No copies. They don't want copies anymore. Like no copies. And it can't be lamination. I'll say lamentation. Well, okay. It can't be laminated. And then you have to have a W-2 form issued within the past year. So if you don't have a job or haven't had a job in a long time, you won't have that. And then your individual tax, individual number, your ITIN, which is your individual taxpayer identification number. So you need that. So that's the state of New Jersey. Okay, so everyone in HR knows this is called the form I-9. This is the I-9 form, and this is from the federal government. The one that I just showed you was from the state of New Jersey. Each state may be different in terms of your point system, in terms of what you need and things of that nature. But let's take a look at this. All right, so you have 3 columns on this. You have column A, column B, and column C. So if you have one item from column A, you're set. You're good. You can get a job, because this is called basically employment verification. We call this e-verification. So every HR person knows about this, because this information that you provide to your HR department goes to the state, and then in turn it goes to the feds. Okay. So if you have a US passport, and it has to be valid, it cannot be expired, you guys. You have to please check your expiration dates. Check your expiration dates, and you have to do that now, because right now with COVID, the wait time is crazy. So say for instance, if you realize that your ID is going to expire next week in the state of New Jersey, it may be too late, because although you can make an appointment for next week, your ID is not going to be mailed to you until like 20 days later. And what if you have official business to take care of in 20 days? You can't take care of your official business. This is very important, very important. So if you have one item from list A, you're fine, you're set. Now, if you don't, you have to have an item from either list B or list C. Okay, I don't know if you can see this, but I'll post this in my in the Facebook. I'll type it, or you can just Google I-9. Okay, it's a government issued form, employment verification. We call it E-Verify. So this will know that you are able to become employed above the table. For those who don't know what above the table means, it means basically you're legal to work, and you're able to pay your taxes and things of that nature. Okay. Under the table is like just cash, and you're not documenting, you're not recording, you're not paying taxes. There's nothing. The government doesn't see you. The government doesn't know. You're just collecting cash, cash, cash. So some people who don't have ID, they may have a lot of cash stored up somewhere in the wall, in between the mattress. I don't know, but they're living a life that is very stealthy. Okay, very stealthy. All right, so B is a driver's license, and it has to be not expired. An ID card issued by federal, state, or local government agencies or entities, a school ID with the photograph. So if you're a college student, if you're a high school student, don't lose your ID. Keep that ID on you, okay? And then it's list C, you need one from list C. So typically what I see, people give me their driver's license as well as their social security card. So when we work with clients and they do not have ID, the only thing that we can do for them is to ensure that they have 6 points. And guess what? We pay for it. We pay for them to get their government issued ID. We write a check to DMV. They take the check with their 6 points. And then guess what? It's processed. They come back to us with the receipt, with the new ID, and then we can work with them on their employment path so that they can feed their family, so that they will not be in a place where they become anxious. And like this guy, Mr. Ewan, because he has a domestic violence charge, he may react to things based on stress and displace his emotions on someone else, because guess what? He cannot get an ID. He cannot get an ID to get a job. He cannot get an ID to secure housing. He cannot get an ID to open up a checking account. He cannot get an ID to open up a savings account, but he can vote. Woo! So anyway, I am not going to keep you on long, but I definitely ask you all, look at your ID today. Make certain that it does not expire within 30 days. So if it expires within 30 days, you need to make an appointment now, because it takes at least 20 days in the state of New Jersey for you to get your ID back, because oftentimes if your ID is expired, we can't help you either. We just can't. We can't submit these forms to the state with an expired ID. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So I ask you a couple of things. One, think about it. Think about going through life, navigating through life without proving who you are and what that can do to your mental wellness. You're not able to prove that you're Sally. You're not able to prove that you're Diane. You're not able to prove that you're Johnny. And you can't go into a bank. You can't get housing services. You can't get therapeutic services. You can barely get any type of services without having that government issued ID. Another thing, look at your ID to make certain that it does not expire within 30 days of today's date. I'm telling you now, you got to do it. People have gotten tripped up. They're like, oh my gosh, I forgot about my ID. Oh my goodness. Now is not the time, because the backlog, the delay, all of that stuff, it's just awful. Okay. So you'll be waiting 20 days to get this newly renewed identification. And that's a major delay for some people, 20 days. So if you basically, were looking for a job and you have to wait. I mean, I guess you can interview, but if you get hired, what are you going to tell them? That's my dog barking in the back. I have a big bull mastiff. Yeah, you know what? I'm veering off. But on my other podcast, I wrote that I was attacked by two big dogs when I was young, when I was in the 5th or 6th grade, which I was. And it left me with a lot of trauma. But now I openly embrace my big bull mastiff, and he's barking now. So maybe it's time for me to go. But I need you to do me a favor before we go. I need you to like, share, and subscribe to this channel because you're going to learn a lot. And unfortunately, because I was not able to upload everything live, I'm going to have to put the information on the Facebook page. And I welcome you to the Negro Club. Yes. Thank you so very much. And then I have another announcement. I will not be live next Friday. I'm going to switch my time and date to Tuesdays at 8 p.m. So you all, y'all have to pray for me because those who know me know my bedtime is at 9 o'clock. So 8 o'clock is pushing it. So hopefully, I won't have too many bags at that time, but we'll still have a wonderful time, my urbanites. Now, I'm telling you, look at your ID. Look at your ID. Make certain it does not expire within. I would say if it expires within 2 months, handle your business now. Seriously, because I don't know what state you're in, but I know in New Jersey, it takes up to 20 days. And then it takes a long time to schedule, and you have to schedule everything online right now. You just can't walk into DMV because the DMVs are not open like that. So let's be mindful. Let's try to get our wealth, but we have to start off with some small steps. A small step is securing your government issued identification so you won't have those anxious thoughts that can lead to perhaps domestic violence. That can lead to, self-sabotage. That can lead to self-medicating through drugs, through liquor, through whatever it is, depression, So anyway, I'm out. I will see you live in 2 weeks. Until that time, have a blessed evening. Bye.